On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the power of a South Korean passport and the popularity of its apartments. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective. It's Thursday, July 31st here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. It's time for our talk on issues of social interest here that made international headlines as well. For more on this, I have Hanna with French weekly paper La Tribune Dimanche here in the studio. Hanna, welcome back.
Thank you for having me here today.
I also have writer Colin with us with the pundit's take on the day's discussion. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Right, Colin, we will start with you today. So the peak holiday period here in South Korea is late July to early August. You've been here for a while now, about a decade, right,
Yes,
Colin?
yes.
And could you share with us perhaps one memorable way of how you indulged in the season?
Well, you learn a certain concept here if you stay here long enough. Actually, you learn it pretty quickly. The cultural idea of Eolchol, which is fight heat with heat. When it's hot, eat something hot. That's usually what it comes down to. Is when people talk about Eolchol, they mean eat something hot during times that it's hot. And right now, it's the hottest time of the summer. As you say, the period is late July to early August. That's the vacation time, and somewhat not coincidentally, also the hottest time of the summer. So we have these 3 days in Korea, the hottest days, Chobok, Jungbok, Malbok. We just passed Jungbok. Malbok's coming up, I want to say, the 9th of August. These are the days we eat samgyetang. This is a dish some viewers may be familiar with. It's a chicken soup, which doesn't sound that exciting when you say it like that, but it's not sort of the chicken soup a Westerner would know from childhood out of a can. It's chicken soup, Korean style. You've got the stone pot, or made of something typically fairly hard, so it retains the heat. You've got a whole chicken in there, and the chicken is stuffed with rice, with ginseng, with jujube, with various ingredients, and there are different versions you can order. It's very hot. It's served with all the steam coming out of it. That's when you eat it, right that moment when it's the hottest, when it's also the hottest day of the year. So that's hence the association samgyetang with these 3 hottest days, Chobok, Jungbok, Malbok. So if you haven't had your samgyetang yet, or if you've never tried it, August 9th, I think it is, for Malbok, could be the day to have it. You know, you can have a true Korean experience, even at a Korean restaurant not in Korea. Maybe, if you have enough Korean people in your area, there might be a samgyetang place. That could give you a sort of a taste of Korean culture without having to go very far.
Have you had your samgyetang this season?
I've missed out for various reasons of preparing for my wife to give birth to twins, but maybe Malbok, I'm going to get home and tell her. We've got to have some on Malbok.
Fingers crossed for that.
Indeed.
Right, and quite a number of South Koreans also seek to go abroad for their summer vacation, and findings show that the South Korean passport, it currently ranks second in terms of global power. What would you say is the significance of this finding?
Well, indeed, the South Korean passport ranks second at the Hinley Passport Index. So basically, this index looks at how powerful passports are over the world, like over 200 countries. So more specifically, the South Korean passport, it moved up from the 3rd to the 2nd place, and it's giving now access to 190 countries without needing a visa in advance, and it's tied with the Japanese passport. So the thing is, like, a strong passport basically shows how far the country's influence goes. So I think that for South Korea, this high rank means that, like, it shows its diplomatic influence all over the global stage, and it shows how strong its economic and political partnerships are, especially because, like, visa-free agreements are based on mutual reciprocity and are closely tied to geopolitical relations. And one thing that is really remarkable here is that the South Korean passport is now ahead of several European countries such as France, Germany, and also like Finland, Ireland. So I think that for South Koreans it means a lot of freedom to travel, but for the country it's also a big advantage in terms of tourism and economic appeal. And personally, when I heard about this, I was thinking that this high ranking really echoes to the like the country's growing cultural influence all over the world. We all know that South Korea is known for its strong soft power driven by K-pop, K-dramas and everything. So yeah, I think it really echoes to this growing influence that goes way beyond Asia.
Right, and standing at the top, it's the Singaporean passport, is it?
Yes, the first one
right,
is the Singaporean.
and the second place is South Korea, neighboring Japan, tied
Yes,
at number
exactly.
2. Right. Colin, let's now talk about another headline related to South Korea by the foreign media. The LA Times carried a rather interesting piece about the popularity of apartments here in South Korea as opposed to individual homes, which is the case over in the US. What are your thoughts on this discrepancy?
Yes, this is a subject that foreign writers on Korea have come back to over and over again through the years. And I do feel like when I see a story like this, especially when I look at the photos, I always have to tell people, Seoul doesn't really look like the photos you see. Typically the coverage, at least the visual coverage, makes Seoul look like it's just these miles and miles of unrelieved, giant, featureless, all identical apartment blocks. There are parts that are like that, but that's not really a picture of the whole city, though one does get that impression reading about Seoul abroad. Regardless, the living situation implied is, I mean, it's a little better than the one implied, but really, yes, as you point out, there is a discrepancy between maybe how Americans see forms of housing and how Koreans do. And in the US, the word apartment has this connotation like, well, it's a place you rent when you're young until you are financially stable enough to buy a detached home and actually be the owner and sort of own land as well. That's the whole idea, part of the much mythologized American dream, I suppose. And in a way, it's not so different in Korea because despite the vast majority of the population in Seoul living in apartments, they are also purchasing them as investments. I mean, buying a home in the US is the main way people invest their money. It's the main way, as is often said, that people have built wealth over the past few generations. Here in Korea too, if you can buy an apartment, don't even bother about the rent you can make from it. It's the gains on the capital itself have been, over the past few decades, enough to justify the purchase, whatever you have to do to get it. But as we've talked about often on this show, the population isn't growing as it used to. And really, these apartments date from an era when the South Korean population was exploding, and even more Seoul's population. People rushing towards Seoul after the war, and when in Seoul, reproducing in great numbers, much greater than today. You had to house these people, and the way to do that was determined to be large apartment complexes, 10 stories, 20 stories, 30 stories. 5 buildings, 10 buildings, 20 buildings, all together. And to an American or to an Englishman, this can look a little dystopian sometimes, but it has been in many ways a very effective solution to deal with a fast-growing population in a very rapidly industrializing and developing country. Now, my mind goes to this book by a writer named Michael Booth. He's from England. He wrote a book about Korea, Japan, Taiwan and China and their relationship, their geopolitical relationship. And he has a section on Korea where he's driving through the countryside. And even in the countryside, you see these big apartment complexes. You'll see just mountains, little hills, fields, rice paddies, or not necessarily rice paddies, but you'll see agricultural land, and then suddenly out will rise this patch of giant concrete apartment buildings, and he'll say, why do I dislike these so much? What's the problem? You know, and he says it's the numbers. The numbers on the side always bother foreigners who are here for the first time because they think, or psychologically it's like, something so big should be recognizable for how big it is, yet these also need numbers. So it's a mismatch between the two concepts. But I think for the most part, these apartment buildings have been fairly comfortable with generation upon generation. They've improved, and you can always tell how old a building is just based on the structure it is, the structure it has, the form it takes, the size. And you know, for a while there, since the late 60s when they came out, when they first started being built, you know, you'd see an apartment building built in 1968 was not as good as the one built in 1975, was not as good as the one built in 1980. The comfort of the apartments, of the complexes, would reflect the rise in the standard of living, which was pretty much in lockstep for not everybody, but the majority of the country. The quality of life for the working person in Korea was getting better year on year in that period. That's a little more complex now, and you don't see the same generational change in housing. But in a way, if you look at the old buildings that still stand in Korea, you can see almost a history of the country's development since not that long after the Korean War.
Right. Well, and Colin has touched upon the reason behind the popularity of apartments here, but perhaps you can go back to that particular article by the LA Times and tell us a bit about what it pinpoints as the reason behind the popularity of apartments here in South Korea.
Yeah, like one very practical reason why these apartments are so popular among South Korean people is how convenient they are. They are built to make life easier, to make the daily life easier. Like they are built as ready-made to give like a ready-made life. Like they usually come with parkings, gyms, daycare center, senior centers, even cafe for mom to gather and to chat. And they also have a pleasant environment. Like they have landscape gardens with artificial waterfalls and even playgrounds. There is also like another thing from a social point of view. Living in those big complexes guarantees a certain level of social interaction, and I think it is quite important in a country where there is over 500,000 of young people who are sad, suffering from loneliness. And it's not even like only me saying that; it's even the South Korean media. They started referring to it as a loneliness epidemic. So, for example, in this article, there is a 29-year-old IT specialist. He said he really likes how easy it is to interact with his neighbor thanks to a well-managed online community within the complex. And yes, another key point is that these complexes, which are often built by the South Korean biggest conglomerates such as Samsung and Hyundai, they have come to symbolize social success and financial stability. So living in one of them has become like typical path to success in South Korea, which is basically get into a top company, then land a job in the big conglomerate, and eventually move into these apartment complexes. So yeah, as Colin said, I think the symbolism goes to it goes back to how the country urbanized in the 1960s and 70s. Because back then, in response to the severe housing shortage caused by the rapid industrialization and the population boom, the apartment complexes have become really popular among the middle and upper classes.
Right. You've been here less than a year in the country, right? What was your first impression of this preferred residential preference that Koreans had, the apartments?
Coming from France and having lived in Paris for my entire life, except some international internships and international studies abroad, I would say that I was quite surprised to see how apartment in Korea are seen as prestigious. Because for example, in Paris, prestige would come from owning a house, especially in Paris, owning a house would be like the ultimate dream, a house with a garden. So yeah, I think that for me it was quite a cultural shock to understand this.
Right, so like Colin said, the apartment has a slightly negative connotation, and you would...
It's not the goal.
Right, it's not the goal. The actual goal would be to have like a single individual house then.
That's the American dream, so they tell me.
Right. Colin, what do you suppose has been the impact of such similar lifestyles or residential areas on the Korean society?
Yeah, what is notable for those who haven't visited Korean apartments is each generation of apartment building, the floor plans are basically the same. So you kind of know how an apartment's going to look if you see the outside of the building. And then if you go in, people can decorate any way they like, people can order any furniture they like, but somehow they always seem to get a very similar couch, they always seem to hang a very similar TV across from the couch and the table between. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of variation. So yes, these are, in a way, the only choice. These apartments are the only choice for housing, but also people, when given their free choice, furnish them very similarly and use them very similarly. I mean, there are not huge variations in what people do with them. So, in this article from the Los Angeles Times, or that was published in the Los Angeles Times, they had one of the expert quotes from a Korean professor. He expressed some concern that the similarity of these buildings led to, or sort of made lives more similar, which if you are an architect, it's tempting to believe in the power of architecture to shape lives. And to an extent, it's probably true. But I would also look at it the other way and see it as a reflection of the society itself. This is a society where people in general don't necessarily, they might mind things about their apartments. They might not like certain things. But I never hear among the complaints that they're too similar. That's never that. The similarity makes them more easily tradable. I mean, they're good financial instruments, as we've been saying, for that reason. They're almost commodities. If you know where the building is generally and what year it was constructed, you know basically what the value is going to be, and to an extent have been able to predict that value and the rise in that value. So the similarity, I don't know if that causes similarity in lifestyles. It might be the other way around, that lifestyles were not necessarily similar enough, but people were sort of willing to put themselves on certain tracks that made it possible for these buildings to be constructed at such a large scale in Korea. I mean, it is a mass society, but a mass society in a very different way than, say, the US or France is a mass society.
Right, and speaking about the society here, Anna, a new study by Statistics Korea shows South Koreans are sleeping less and we are spending much more time on screens. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular study, and what are your observations with regard to the daily impact of smartphones on South Koreans?
Yeah, well, the survey released by Statistics Korea showed that the average amount of time sleeping is down by 8 minutes a day. So now it dropped to 8 hours and 4 minutes a day. And this is the first time that the sleep duration has decreased in South Korea since this survey began in 1999. So it is a big reversal in a long-term trend in South Korea because over the years, South Korean people used to sleep more and more longer over the years, and like an official from Statistics Korea say that this could be linked to lifestyle changes, and in particular, he pointed out that time spent on media use increased compared to 5 years, and which likely affected overall sleeping duration. And just to give you some figures, the average South Korean now spends 5 hours and 8 minutes a day on leisure activity, and more than half of that time goes to media consumption, including watching YouTube. So as for my own observation as a French correspondent who recently settled in Seoul, I can say that the relationship South Koreans have with technologies, smartphones and screens was quite a cultural shock for me at the beginning. For example, you know, in Seoul, you have the traffic lights signals who are built into the ground. So for me, it's really a big example of how the city has to adapt itself to this hyper-connectivity lifestyle. And also when, in the subway, you can see everybody has their head down on their phone, their eyes locked up on their screens, and during the entire ride, and they barely looks up. So yes, as a foreigner who recently arrived in South Korea, this is definitely something you notice. Yes, so I can say that when I arrived, this hyperconnectivity lifestyle, it was really something I felt right away when I arrived.
Right. And now, what's the last thing you look at before you fall asleep?
Maybe it's my smartphone.
Your smartphone,
too, yes.
right? Colin, is that the case for you as well? What's the last thing you look at before you fall asleep?
Typically, yeah, I save messages that I'm sending to people in the West for the last moment, because it's when it's a more reasonable time there. So it's like, read whatever I'm reading, and then before I go to sleep, go on WhatsApp, send the messages, and then I'm done.
So the last thing you do see is the screen of your smartphone then? Do ask me what I look at the last. My husband's face, not my smartphone.
Indeed. He's watching, right?
Right. Colin, staying with this study by Statistics Korea, we are also reportedly spending less time on meals and choosing to dine alone. What are your takeaways with regard to this reality?
Well, we could tie this into the discussion of apartments, because there is a concern. Now, Seoul's apartment market is still very strong, you could say, to the point where you could call it a housing crisis in that they're so expensive, which is the same thing you hear in many American cities with many fewer apartment buildings, including Los Angeles, whose newspaper ran this article. That's part of the reason, I suspect. And so there's this sense yes, prices are getting higher and higher, worse and worse, you could say, but inevitably, this is going to stop. It has to stop because family sizes are getting smaller. So some of these apartments, many are built for families of 4. And they're not so many families of four. I mean, even if a couple has kids, they don't usually have to have two kids. I mean, they might have one, and then if they have two, they might not be looking to buy a big apartment on the 30th story. So there's the sense that yes, the family size is decreasing. There are more one-person households or two-person households, but more to the point, there are one-person households, which means there are more one-person meals going on, whether inside the home or outside of it. And there's a whole word for this now. Any phenomenon in Korea, any social change or phenomenon gets its own word, usually a contraction. 혼밥 is the word I'm thinking of. 혼자, bap meaning a meal, 혼자 meaning alone. And there have been restaurants advertising themselves as being good for 혼밥. And as a freelancer, I do eat plenty of 혼밥. I was doing it right before I came here, in fact, eating at a cafe by Nambu Station, but usually I'm working while I do it. So it's sort of like, how to put it, it doesn't feel like it's so much of a social phenomenon as a professional one. I've got things I got to get done, and somehow it's got to happen while I'm eating. Right. And for many Koreans, it might be the same. Right, for convenience, quite
Indeed.
The convenience is all. As we've said about the apartments or the eating alone or whatever it might be, it always wins the day in Korea.
Right, especially in modern Korea. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Colin, as always, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
And Anna, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. Do join us again same time tomorrow as we touch upon South Korea's tariff deal with the US. Thank you for now.